Hello and welcome to Telesur English. I am Estefania Bravo. This is from the South. Lawmakers from Bolivia's movement towards socialism party have denounced what they call permanent and systematic political persecution at the hands of the de facto government.
The president of Bolivia's lower house made a suggestion to receive the yearly report on the administration of the post-president Evo Morales live on television. As soon as he did, he was sued by the de facto authorities.
Every January 22nd, the sitting president gave a report on their administration. This is what I suggested, and they responded by claiming I had committed crimes of sedition and other made-up offenses.
Lawmaker for the MAS party, Sonia Brito, has also been threatened with a legal procedure for calling on the Interior Minister to answer for the state-caused violence in November, which left 34 people dead.
This is a witch hunt. How could they talk about reconciliation, about peace, about human rights, when they are violating all of these things on a daily basis? How could they win elections when there are no guarantees for free and fair elections for so many of us, for the people? We not even longer have free speech.
Political persecution does not only affect members of the MAS party, but their militants as well. It even extends to officials and workers of the former administration.
We're still in the middle of a coup. They're persecuting MAS leaders. They're searching for them. We need to speak about this dictatorship that has been imposed on us.
Many argue that the self-proclaimed government that has been in power since November is overextending its capacities.
This is a transitional government that constitutionally has limited power.
In the past few days, the de facto government announced that close to 600 former members of Evo Morales' administration are being investigated under trumped-up charges of sedition, terrorism, and misuse of state funds. As a general rule, any suspect has been jailed.
The U.S. Embassy in Bolivia has confirmed that a, quote, technical team of experts in electoral systems and democratic strengthening, including U.S. aid representatives, arrived in Bolivia. The mission will allegedly focus on assessing how the United States can support the May 3rd election and also democratic institutions in general. According to reports, the results of the team's work will help to define the programs and budget that the United States government will pour into the elections in Bolivia following the November coup. The de facto government in Bolivia continues to persecute former public officials. As of today, 592 former officials are being investigated. Freddy Morales has more from La Paz.
Lawmakers of the MAS party are denouncing political persecution from the de facto self-proclaimed government, which took power on November 12th. One example of the persecution is that the president of the lower house, Sergio Choque, suggested that the message of President Evo Morales should be broadcasted on TV. Immediately after this, an investigation for sedition and other crimes was started against him. Other lawmakers of the MAS party announced that they are also suffering from political persecution. We have been informed that in the last hours, 592 former officials are being investigated.
That was Freddy Morales from La Paz. Puerto Rico's top energy executive says the island's largest power plants could remain offline for up to a year because of earthquake damage. Only half of the Caribbean island had power restored 2 days after the 6.4 magnitude quake, which hit on Tuesday. The Costa Sur plant, which was near the quake's epicenter, was seriously damaged. Without Costa Sur, Puerto Rico would need the rest of its power plants to operate at or near peak capacity in order to meet demand. Meanwhile, the public power utility is $9 billion in debt. In Guyana, between 1 and 5 p.m. local time, the largest number of political parties ever to contest a general and regional election will submit their list of candidates for the March 2nd polls. The main contenders are the ruling A Partnership for National Unity and the Alliance for Change coalition, challenged by the People's Progressive Party Civic Alliance. 3 smaller parties are also participating in the election. The incumbent President David Granger has previously said there will be a reshuffle of the government should this coalition retain power. Saturday marks 10 years since the French-speaking Caribbean nation Haiti was flattened by a 7.0 earthquake that killed hundreds of thousands and destroyed much of the capital, Port-au-Prince. The earthquake was the fifth most serious in history, killing more than 300,000 people and injuring around the same. Almost 1.5 million were also made homeless in the poorest country of the Western Hemisphere. 10 months after the quake hit, Haiti reported a cholera outbreak introduced by UN peacekeepers, where roughly 10,000 died and 1 million were made ill. Protests called for their expulsion and the mission left in 2017. Anti-government demonstrations have since continued as the population voices its frustration over hyperinflation, oil and gas shortages, and the corrupt ruling regime. And the Caribbean community has expressed concern for the situation that Haiti is going through. The regional body says it's particularly concerned about the several incidents of violence and deaths which have come as a result. CARICOM calls on all stakeholders to engage in constructive dialogue towards resolving the crisis, and says that the community feels it is its duty to assist the people of its fellow Caribbean nation. The communiqué by Chairman Mia Motley said that they will liaise with the Haitian government to facilitate a visit with the government and people of Haiti and other interested parties to explore an acceptable way forward towards alleviating the present crisis. Relatives and representatives of the 43 missing students from Ayotzinapa's Teachers College in Mexico have met with President Andrés Manuel López Obrador at the National Palace and praised his decision to allow international experts to return to help on the investigation. The students disappeared back in 2014 and the then president closed the case.
With the returning of the interdisciplinary group of independent experts, I think that we have been institutionally strengthened to work faster in 2020. The new hypothesis is that there was a separation of the students and that their whereabouts can be located in different places around the municipalities of Iguala.
Argentina is expecting the release of current economic figures by the Official Statistics Institute, and hopes are high for a decrease in the inflation rate as the government of Alberto Fernández has sought to reverse those figures.
Not long after Alberto Fernández took power, experts started to mention a small decrease in the inflation rate, just as the nation saw its highest inflation since 1991.
We ended 2019 with the inflation at 55%. It was mainly caused by the jump in the exchange rate, brutal depreciation experienced since April 2018 on top of massive price hikes were the largest source of inflation.
Experts say that the current scenario is different and estimate a deceleration of inflation for January 2020, caused by growing instability and currency controls.
We now have a strict exchange rate. The price of the dollar is being kept in check. They have set limits for buying currency and have frozen certain prices. As such, we should see a decrease in the inflation rate.
The possible decrease could be a result of the economic emergency law, although experts insist that since March of 2020, new controls should be implemented to reactivate the economy.
When we talk about inflation or devaluation, it seems very abstract, but the reality is that Argentinians are going through a rough time. There is a lot of poverty. The middle class is also in very bad shape. As a result, many emergency measures had to be implemented, and we have to establish a reactivation plan after, to reset people's purchasing power and restart the internal economy and internal production.
On January 15, the National Institute of Statistics and Census will give the final and official number of the current inflation, a figure that will establish a before and after in regards to the nation's political decisions.
We'll be right back. Stay with us. Welcome back. The Iranian Aerospace Force commander was warned that the recent missile strikes on Iraqi bases housing U.S. troops was just the beginning of a major operation. The attack was in revenge for the U.S. killing of top Iranian military commander Qasem Soleimani.
What was done by the Aerospace Division of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the Shahid Soleimani operation, and the missile strikes on one of America's most important bases was in fact the beginning of this major operation, a move that in God's will continue in the whole region.
Family and friends of the victims who died in the Ukrainian International Airlines plane crash have set up a makeshift memorial at Kiev's main airport this Friday. Pilots and flight crew also gathered to mourn at the floral tribute, which had candles and portraits of their loved ones. The flight went down minutes after taking off from Iran's main airport on Wednesday. All 176 people on board were killed when the jet crashed into farmland on the outskirts of Tehran. The head of Iran's civil aviation organization has rejected allegations that a missile brought down the Ukraine International Airlines plane that crashed this week, killing all 176 people on board. He said dozens of other aircraft's planes were flying over the same airspace at the time of the crash. Authorities added that a complete investigation is underway in collaboration with international experts, including Ukrainian officials and people from Boeing. Nonetheless, U.S. and Canadian government officials have made unsubstantiated claims that the plane was accidentally shot down by an Iranian missile.
The National Aviation Organization is not permitted to make guesses. We must be sure of what we say. The reason of the crash is not clear for us yet. But as we have mentioned before, we are certain no missile hit it. We should find out why there was a fire and what has been the reason for the crash. Boeing has not confirmed a missile impact. This unproven allegation is what American politicians have repeated. If their theory is credible, they can let the ICAO know about it. It should be posted on the ICAO website for the world to see. This claim was simply made by American politicians.
The United Nations Security Council met in New York, where the threat of potential conflict between the United States and Iran was discussed. Mary Robinson, the chair of the Elders, said it was highly regrettable that Iran's Foreign Minister Mohammad Javad Zarif had been denied a visa to travel to the U.S. to address the Council.
It is my understanding that Iran's Foreign Minister Javad Zarif was due to address this chamber today. He was going to speak about the role of the UN Charter in supporting international peace and security, but has been prevented from doing so as tensions have arisen between Iran and the United States. This is highly regrettable. It is precisely in times such as these that we need to hear the voices of all concerned.
The peaceful settlement of disputes, the equal rights of men and women, non-intervention, self-determination and the sovereign equality of member states, and clear rules governing the use of force as set out in Article 2, Paragraph 4 and Chapter 7 of the Charter. These principles are not favors or concessions. They are the foundation of international relations, and they are the core to peace and international law.
Iran's ambassador to the United Nations, Majid Takhravanchi, has read a letter on behalf of his country's foreign minister, who was denied a U.S. visa to attend the meeting. It called on the Security Council to protect multilateralism and never appease imperialist regimes like the United States.
The world is at a crossroads. With the end of monopolies on power, one unhinged regime is frantically clamoring to turn back time. This has meant more damaging American unilateralism in defiance of international norms and law. Most recently, a dastardly targeted assassination of the heroes who were the nightmare of groups such as ISIS. But since the regime's inauguration, more and more threats and attacks against the people of Iran and other sovereign nations in utter disregard of the Charter. The question amidst this rogue behavior is how to protect the UN Charter. For if other states become passive unilateralists, if they succumb to unilateralism in their bilateral relationships or compromise Charter principles for the sake of short-term gains or the avoidance of immediate harm, they inadvertently encourage the lawless unilateralists to bully them. To protect multilateralism, we must never appease unilateralist regimes. We need political will as well as an instrument that will safeguard the values, principles, and multilateralism enshrined in the Charter.
In the United States, the House of Representatives approved a resolution aimed at limiting President Trump's ability to use military action against Iran without congressional approval. The resolution was sponsored by Democratic Congresswoman Elisa Slotkin, who is a former CIA analyst and senior Defense Department official. Now it will go to the Senate for consideration, though it does not have to be signed by the president. It also won't be legally binding, making it more of a political signal from the House than a resolution with legal effect. Venezuelan Foreign Minister Jorge Arreaza has revealed the existence of a document drafted by the White House that asks for support in interfering in Venezuela's parliamentary elections. This document was sent to foreign ministers across the world, hoping to rally support for opposition figure Juan Guaidó.
Luis Parra, an opposition lawmaker, is now in charge of the National Assembly of Venezuela. The United States were betting on the re-election of Juan Guaidó as president of the Assembly. And now, in an illegal action, he was sworn in by a small group of his supporters who are also aligned with Donald Trump's foreign policy. On Tuesday, they arrived to the first ordinary session of the National Assembly with violence as part of their strategy. They attempted to enter the premises of the National Assembly by force. Their radical strategy was to bring in a number of unauthorized lawmakers in order to say that Guaidó had the support of 100 of them. But Juan Guaidó refused to enter the assembly even after the guards opened the gate for him and his supporters. Once again, he put on a show for the media. Guaidó's mob attacked security members who resisted their provocation. The media had expected a picture showing aggression by the national security that could be shown around the world. But the swearing in of a new constitutionally elected leadership changed the plans of the U.S. government. Plans which were exposed in a document which came into the possession of the Venezuelan government.
In the first paragraph, they say that their goal is to impose a transitional government in Venezuela that can lead so-called free and fair elections for a democratic and prosperous Venezuela. They would do this by supporting their agents in the National Assembly and by applying democratic pressure against the democratically elected government. This combination is needed so that they could control the dialogue process.
A dialogue process was set up thanks to the repeated calls by President Nicolas Maduro and in rejection to economic sanctions. In the document presented by Arreaza, the U.S. admits that the blockade has harmed the Venezuelan people.
They imposed this blockade to try and make the people suffer, but thanks to the achievements made by the revolution, we have been able to soften the blow from these sanctions. They have even approved laws in the U.S. Congress that are linked to their own yearly budget, giving $400 million to the opposition here so that they can fund their destabilization attempts.
The Venezuelan opposition has received funds from the United States, but this money was not distributed equally, and that's one of the main points of contention within their ranks, and the reason why opposition lawmakers broke rank and turned their backs on Juan Guaidó, lawmakers who are now themselves receiving threats.
These people have been able to get our personal phone numbers, even our children's phone numbers. They call my 15-year-old daughter saying, "We are gonna kill you, bitch." That's what these fascists are doing, and Freddy Guevara is behind it all.
But the U.S. document found no support from other nations. Parliamentary elections will take place in 2020, but under the rules of the Venezuelan Constitution and with no concern for the interests of the United States.
Madeline Garcia, Telesur, Caracas, Venezuela.
We'll be right back. Stay with us. Welcome back. Clashes broke out between the group of protesters and riot police in Beirut, Lebanon, during anti-government demonstrations. The commotion broke out when a group of protesters tried to storm City Hall, accusing the governor of Beirut of corruption. As they were calling for the authorities to step down, an angry group of men attacked them and accused them of targeting Sunni Muslims. This is when riot police intervened. Massive anti-government protests erupted in October, eventually forcing the resignation of the former prime minister. Still, protesters have continued to take to the streets, demanding that the entire political class be removed. Around 20,000 have mobilized in Sydney, Australia, calling on the right-wing government to tackle global warming and cut back on non-renewable energy following deadly climate-fueled bushfires. Protesters carried signs and posters denouncing the government's efforts to fight climate change. Major roads in Sydney were blocked as protesters chanted "ScoMo has to go," referring to Prime Minister Scott Morrison. At least 27 people have died and more than 2,000 homes destroyed in the unprecedented blazes. Several citizens have also been subjected to repeated evacuations.
We're here today because this has to stop. We can't keep forgetting and pretending that climate change isn't real and that the planet isn't burning. Australia, one of the largest islands in the world, is a perfect example. The animals are burning and dying. It's just got to stop. People are pretending it's not true. Politicians are pretending it's not true. Something has to happen.
Protests against the French government's proposed pension reform enter their 38th day. Still, the regime has pushed ahead with its plans by including a clause to raise the retirement age by 2 years to age 64. Prime Minister Edouard Philippe held talks with trade unions this Friday to break the deadlock over the issue. Workers have argued that the reform will erode hard-earned benefits and leave pensioners worse off. The bill will be sent to France's pension administrators later on Friday and will be debated in Parliament from mid-February. And we finish with this show with a flashback to this day in 2019, since Venezuela is marking the day on which President Nicolás Maduro began his new constitutional mandate for the 2019-2025 period. It was on this day a year ago that crowds lined the streets of Caracas outside of the Supreme Court, where Nicolás Maduro was sworn in for a new term. It was a celebration of the triumph of the Venezuelan people, who has elected their leader in a democratic and free vote held in May 20th, 2018. And with that, we've come to the end of this news brief. You can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And join us on social media. We are on Facebook, on Twitter, and on Instagram. For Telesur English, I am Estefania Bravo. Until next time.